The morning mist hung low over the Welsh countryside as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at the window of their private residence. Her fingers traced the condensation on the glass while she watched her 3 children playing in the garden below. George was teaching Charlotte how to properly kick a football, while little Louis chased after butterflies with the carefree abandon that only a 5-year-old could possess. The sight brought a gentle smile to her face, but behind her eyes lay the weight of months that had tested every fiber of her being. The summer holidays were drawing to a close, and, with them, the protective cocoon she had wrapped around herself and her family. For months, Catherine had been away from the public eye, taking what the palace carefully termed a planned break from royal engagements. The truth, known only to her closest circle, was far more complex and emotionally charged than any official statement could convey. Catherine's phone buzzed on the nearby table. Another message from her private secretary about the upcoming announcement of her return to royal duties. The media speculation had been relentless throughout her absence, with tabloids crafting wild theories about everything from marital troubles to secret health issues. None of them came close to the real story, a story of a woman who had reached a breaking point and found the courage to rebuild herself from the ground up. Turning away from the window, Catherine walked through the halls of their home, each step echoing with memories of the person she used to be. Before the overwhelming pressure of constant public scrutiny had begun to chip away at her confidence. Before she had started questioning every word, every gesture, every outfit choice. Before the sleepless nights wondering if she was good enough for the role history had thrust upon her. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual erosion, like waves slowly wearing down a cliff face. The relentless criticism in the media, the endless comparisons to other royal women, the pressure to be perfect while raising 3 children in the most unforgiving spotlight imaginable. Catherine had always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to weather any storm with grace and composure. But even the strongest foundations can crack under enough pressure. The breaking point had come 6 months earlier, during what should have been a routine charity visit to a children's hospital. Catherine remembered standing in the corridor, surrounded by her protection officers and staff, when suddenly, the walls felt like they were closing in. Her chest tightened, her breathing became shallow, and, for a terrifying moment, she thought she might collapse right there in front of everyone. She had excused herself, citing a sudden headache, and had barely made it to the car before the tears came. That night, she had sat William down and told him everything. About the anxiety that had been building for months, about feeling like she was drowning in expectations, about the fear that she was failing not just the monarchy, but their children who deserved a mother who was whole and present. William had listened without judgment, his own eyes filling with tears as he realized how much his wife had been suffering in silence. The decision to step back had not been easy. Catherine knew it would fuel endless speculation and criticism. Some would call her weak, others would question her commitment to her royal role. But William had been unwavering in his support, reminding her that her first duty was to herself and their family. "You can't pour from an empty cup," he had told her, using words that would become her mantra over the coming months. The early days of her break had been the hardest. Catherine felt like she was letting everyone down, the charities that depended on her patronage, the people who looked up to her, the institution she had sworn to serve. The guilt was almost overwhelming, but, slowly, with the help of a therapist and the unconditional support of her family, she began to understand that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. The summer had been a revelation. For the first time in years, Catherine had been able to simply be herself. She spent hours in the garden with her children, teaching them about plants and watching them discover the world around them. She rediscovered her love of photography, capturing candid moments of family life that would never be shared with the public but meant everything to her. She read books for pleasure, took long walks without security details, and slowly began to remember who she was beneath all the titles and expectations. The healing process wasn't linear. There were days when the old anxieties crept back in, when she questioned whether she would ever be strong enough to return to public life. But there were more days filled with laughter, with genuine moments of joy that reminded her why life was beautiful. She had learned to be gentle with herself, to acknowledge her feelings without judgment, and to understand that vulnerability wasn't a weakness but a source of strength. As the weeks passed, Catherine began to feel a familiar stirring, the desire to serve, to make a difference, to use her platform for good. But, this time, it felt different. Instead of being driven by duty and expectation, it came from a place of authentic passion and renewed purpose. She had always cared deeply about early childhood development, mental health, and supporting families, but now these causes felt even more personal and meaningful. The conversations with William about her return had been careful and thoughtful. They both agreed that things needed to be different this time. Catherine wouldn't be returning to the same overwhelming schedule that had contributed to her breakdown. Instead, she would be strategic about her engagements, focusing on quality over quantity, depth over breadth. She would also be more open about her own struggles, using her experience to help others who might be facing similar challenges. The children had been remarkable throughout the entire process. At 8, 10, and 5, they were old enough to understand that their mother needed time to rest and recover, though the specifics were kept age-appropriate. They had rallied around her with the kind of unconditional love that only children can provide, drawing her pictures, bringing her flowers from the garden, and simply being their authentic selves in a world that often felt artificial and constrained. George, with his serious demeanor and old soul, had become even more protective of his mother. He would often check on her during their quiet moments, asking simple questions like, "Are you feeling better today, Mama?" that somehow cut straight to the heart of everything. Charlotte, spirited and empathetic, had appointed herself as the family's unofficial mood monitor, organizing impromptu dance parties whenever she sensed anyone needed cheering up. And Louis, blissfully unaware of the complexities of royal life, had been her constant source of pure, uncomplicated joy. The support from the extended family had been unwavering as well. The king had personally called to check on her well-being, sharing his own experiences with the pressures of royal life and offering wisdom gained from decades of service. Queen Camilla had become an unexpected source of strength, drawing on her own journey of finding her place within the royal family to offer practical advice and emotional support. Catherine's own family, her parents Michael and Carol, and her siblings Pippa and James, had formed a protective circle around her, providing the kind of normalcy and unconditional love that had always been her anchor. Her mother, in particular, had been instrumental in helping Catherine rediscover her inner strength, reminding her of the confident, capable woman she had raised. The media speculation had been intense throughout her absence. Every rare public appearance was dissected, every photo analyzed for clues about her state of mind or the state of her marriage. The rumors ranged from the ridiculous to the hurtful, but Catherine had learned to tune out the noise. She understood now that she couldn't control what others said about her, but she could control how she responded to it. The decision about when and how to announce her return had been carefully considered. Catherine wanted to be completely ready, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. She needed to be certain that she was returning from a place of strength rather than obligation. The timing felt right now. She felt like herself again, but better. Stronger. More authentic. More purposeful. The announcement would be different from typical royal communications. Instead of the usual formal statements, Catherine had decided to be more personal and transparent about her journey. She wanted people to understand that taking time for mental health wasn't a luxury but a necessity, and that seeking help was a sign of strength, not weakness. As she prepared to step back into public life, Catherine felt a mix of emotions. There was nervousness about facing the cameras again, about whether the public would accept her after her extended absence. But there was also excitement about the work ahead, about the causes she was passionate about the difference she could make with her renewed sense of purpose and authentic voice. The woman who would be returning to royal duties was fundamentally different from the one who had stepped away months earlier. She had learned to set boundaries, to prioritize her well-being, to ask for help when she needed it. She had discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed and had found ways to maintain her authentic self within the constraints of royal life. Most importantly, she had learned that being perfect wasn't the goal, being real was. And, as she stood at the threshold of her return to public service, Catherine felt ready to show the world what that looked like. She was no longer the princess who tried to meet everyone else's expectations. She was the woman who had found her own voice and was ready to use it to make a real difference in the world. The morning of the announcement dawned crisp and clear, autumn beginning to paint the leaves in brilliant shades of gold and amber. Catherine stood in her dressing room, staring at the carefully selected outfit hanging before her. Every choice mattered now, she knew. The color would be analyzed, the designer scrutinized, the message interpreted in a dozen different ways by royal watchers around the world. But, for the first time in months, she felt in control of that narrative. The deep navy blue dress was one of her favorites, elegant but approachable, professional yet warm. She had chosen it not because a stylist recommended it or because it would photograph well, but because it made her feel like herself. That simple act of authentic choice felt revolutionary after years of decisions driven by protocol and public perception. As she prepared for the day ahead, Catherine's mind drifted to the conversation she'd had with her team the evening before. The palace communications staff had gathered around the dining table at Kensington Palace, their usual formal meeting room replaced by the more intimate setting where the family shared their daily meals. It was symbolic, she realized. This return would be more personal, more human than anything she had done before. The statement they had crafted together was unlike any royal communication in recent memory. Instead of the typical formal language that kept the public at arm's length, Catherine had insisted on words that came from her heart. She wanted people to understand that behind the titles and tiaras was a real woman who had faced real struggles and found real solutions. Her private secretary, Sarah, had been particularly supportive throughout the drafting process. Having worked with Catherine for several years, Sarah understood better than most the pressure the princess had been under and the courage it had taken to step away and, then, to return on her own terms. The two women had developed a close working relationship built on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. The children had been told about the announcement, though in terms they could understand. William had sat them down the previous evening and explained that Mama was feeling much better and was ready to start doing her important work again. The children had responded with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from seeing a beloved parent return to her full self. George, always the thoughtful one, had asked if this meant they would have less time together as a family. Catherine had knelt down to his level, looking him straight in the eyes as she promised that she had learned how to balance her work and her family in a way that honored both. She would never again sacrifice her role as their mother for her role as a princess. She had found a way to be authentically both. The first part of the day involved a series of private meetings at Kensington Palace. Catherine wanted to personally speak with the key members of her staff before the public announcement. These weren't just professional check-ins, they were conversations with people who had supported her through her most challenging period and who would be crucial partners in this new chapter. Her first meeting was with James, her private secretary who had been with her since the early days of her marriage. He had watched her grow from a sometimes uncertain young woman into a confident princess, and he had been one of the first to notice the signs of strain that had led to her break. His relief at seeing her renewed energy was evident in his warm smile as they discussed the months ahead. They talked through the carefully planned schedule that would mark her return. Unlike the packed itineraries of the past, this schedule was deliberately spacious, allowing time between engagements for reflection and preparation. Catherine had also insisted on including more of the causes closest to her heart, particularly those dealing with mental health and early childhood development, work that felt even more meaningful given her recent experiences. Her meeting with the heads of her key charities was particularly emotional. These were organizations she had worked with for years, causes she genuinely cared about, and the people who ran them had become more than professional colleagues, they were friends. Many had sent private messages of support during her time away, making it clear that they understood her need to prioritize her well-being and that they would be ready to welcome her back whenever she felt prepared. The conversation with Dr. Martinez, who ran a mental health charity for young people, was especially poignant. Catherine had first become involved with the organization years earlier, but her recent personal experience with anxiety and the healing process had given her insights that would make her advocacy even more powerful and authentic. Catherine shared some of what she had learned during her time away, the importance of recognizing when you need help, the strength it takes to ask for support, and the way that vulnerability can actually become a source of connection and healing. Dr. Martinez listened with tears in her eyes, understanding that Catherine's openness about her own struggles would give hope to countless young people facing similar challenges. The afternoon brought a different kind of preparation as Catherine met with the photographer who would be taking the official portrait to accompany the announcement. She had specifically requested Maria Santos, a photographer known for capturing authentic emotion and natural beauty in her subjects. Catherine wanted images that showed her as she truly was now, strong, genuine, and ready to serve, but also human and approachable. The photo session took place in the gardens of Kensington Palace, among the flowers and trees that had been part of her healing journey over the summer. As Maria worked, she captured not just Catherine's external transformation but something deeper, a sense of peace and purpose that hadn't been present in her official photos for years. Between shots, Catherine found herself thinking about the thousands of people who would see these images, read her words, and perhaps find some comfort in knowing that even a princess could struggle with mental health challenges and emerge stronger. She thought about the young mothers who might be feeling overwhelmed, the women facing their own crises of confidence, the people who needed to know that seeking help was not just acceptable but admirable. As evening approached, the final preparations were completed. The statement had been proofread one last time, the photographs selected, the timeline for release confirmed. But, for Catherine, the most important preparation was the quiet moment she took in her private sitting room, surrounded by family photos and personal mementos that reminded her of who she truly was beneath all the public roles. William found her there as the sun was setting, painting the room in soft golden light. He sat beside her on the sofa where they had shared so many important conversations over the years, discussing their engagement, planning their wedding, talking through the challenges of raising children in the public eye, and, most recently, working through the crisis that had led to her time away. They didn't need many words. After more than a decade together, they could communicate volumes with just a look or a touch. William took her hand and squeezed it gently, his way of saying that he was proud of her courage, that he supported her completely, and that he was excited to see the difference she would make with this new approach to royal service. The children joined them for dinner, filling the room with their chatter about school, friends, and weekend plans. For Catherine, these ordinary family moments had become extraordinarily precious. She had learned during her time away that this foundation, this loving, chaotic, wonderfully normal family life, was what made everything else possible. After the children were in bed, Catherine and William walked through the quiet halls of their home, discussing the days and weeks ahead. The announcement would go out the next morning, followed by a carefully planned series of engagements that would mark her official return to public duties. But tonight was about this moment, the calm before what would undoubtedly be a media storm, the last private hours before she would once again become public property. They talked about the lessons learned, the changes that would be implemented, and the hope they both felt for the future. Catherine had proven to herself that she could step away when she needed to, heal in her own time, and return on her own terms. That knowledge gave her a different kind of confidence, not the brittle perfection she had once strived for, but the deep assurance that comes from knowing and accepting yourself completely. As they prepared for bed, Catherine caught sight of herself in the mirror and was struck by the woman looking back at her. The face was the same, but there was something fundamentally different in the eyes. The tension that had been her constant companion for years was gone, replaced by a clarity and peace she hadn't felt since the early days of her marriage. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the breakdown that had initially felt like a failure but had actually been the beginning of her breakthrough. The months of therapy, self-reflection, and healing that had taught her how to honor both her public responsibilities and her private needs. The support of family, friends, and professionals who had helped her rebuild her foundation on more solid ground. Tomorrow would bring challenges, she knew. The media attention would be intense, the expectations high, the scrutiny unforgiving. There would be those who questioned her absence, criticized her approach, or doubted her commitment. But Catherine felt ready for all of it in a way she never had before, because she was no longer trying to be perfect, she was simply committed to being real. As sleep approached, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for the breakdown that had forced her to rebuild, for the family that had supported her unconditionally, for the privilege of being able to use her platform to help others, and for the second chance to approach royal service from a place of authentic strength rather than dutiful compliance. The woman who would face the cameras tomorrow was not the same woman who had stepped away months earlier. She was better. She was stronger. She was real. And she was ready to show the world what royal service could look like when it came from a place of genuine purpose and healed hearts. The world seemed to hold its breath as the announcement was released at precisely 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. Within minutes, Catherine's carefully crafted statement was being shared across social media platforms, dissected by royal correspondents, and discussed in living rooms around the globe. But, in the quiet sanctuary of her office at Kensington Palace, Catherine sat reading the responses with a mixture of anxiety and hope. The statement had been unlike anything the royal family had ever released. Instead of the usual formal language about duties and obligations, Catherine had spoken directly about her struggles with anxiety, the importance of mental health, and her journey toward healing. She had acknowledged that stepping away from public life had been necessary for her well-being and that her return would be different, more focused, more authentic, and more aligned with her values. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family members, and colleagues expressing their support and admiration for her honesty. Social media was flooded with comments from people sharing their own mental health struggles and thanking her for making it okay to not be okay. Mental health charities reported a surge in calls to their helplines as people felt empowered to seek support for their own challenges. But, perhaps most meaningful to Catherine were the messages from other mothers, women who had felt the crushing weight of trying to be perfect in an imperfect world. They wrote about their own moments of breakdown, their struggles with anxiety and depression, their journey toward self-acceptance. In sharing her story, Catherine had given them permission to share theirs. Sarah knocked gently on the door before entering with a cup of tea and the morning's newspaper coverage. The headlines were mixed, as Catherine had expected. Some praised her courage and authenticity, others questioned whether a member of the royal family should be so open about personal struggles. But Catherine had prepared herself for this, knowing that her decision to be vulnerable would not be universally welcomed. The first major interview request had come within an hour of the announcement. Every major network and publication wanted to speak with her about her experience, her recovery, and her plans for the future. Catherine had decided to accept one interview, with a journalist known for her sensitive approach to mental health topics and her ability to conduct conversations that felt more like healing discussions than interrogations. The preparation for the interview required a different kind of courage than Catherine was used to. Instead of rehearsing talking points about charity work or family events, she found herself going deeper into her own experience, thinking about how to articulate feelings and insights that she had previously kept private. Her media training over the years had taught her to deflect personal questions, but now she would be deliberately opening herself up to them. Her therapist, Dr. Helen Morrison, joined her for a session the morning before the interview. They had been working together throughout Catherine's journey, and Dr. Morrison had become not just a professional support but a trusted confidant who understood the unique pressures of royal life. Together, they discussed boundaries, what Catherine felt comfortable sharing and what would remain private, how to handle difficult questions, and ways to stay grounded during what would inevitably be an emotionally challenging conversation. Dr. Morrison reminded Catherine that her willingness to be vulnerable was already having an impact. The charity she worked with had reported a 30% increase in people seeking support since the announcement, many specifically mentioning Catherine's statement as their inspiration to reach out for help. This wasn't just about Catherine's personal healing anymore, it was about using her experience to help others find their own path to wellness. The day of the interview arrived with a crispness that seemed to mirror Catherine's mental clarity. She had chosen to conduct the conversation in one of the smaller, more intimate rooms at Kensington Palace, surrounded by family photos and personal touches that would help her feel grounded and authentic. The formal staterooms where she usually conducted official business felt wrong for this kind of deeply personal discussion. Journalist Emma Richardson arrived with a small crew, but Catherine had insisted on keeping the production minimal. This wasn't meant to be a grand spectacle but an honest conversation between two women about the realities of mental health, motherhood, and public service. Emma had covered mental health issues for years and understood the delicate balance between public interest and personal privacy that this interview required. As they settled into comfortable chairs with the cameras rolling, Catherine felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, but it was different from the paralyzing anxiety she had experienced months earlier. This nervousness came from knowing she was about to share something deeply meaningful, something that could make a real difference in people's lives. Emma's first question was gentle but direct. "Your Royal Highness, what was the moment you knew you needed to step away from public duties?" Catherine took a deep breath, centered herself, and began to share her story with a candor that surprised even her. She talked about the gradual buildup of pressure, the way anxiety had crept into her daily life like an unwelcome visitor who had decided to stay. She described the morning she couldn't get out of bed, paralyzed by the fear that she wasn't good enough, smart enough, or strong enough for the role history had given her. She spoke about the guilt she felt about disappointing people and the fear that asking for help would be seen as weakness. But she also talked about the turning point, the moment she realized that she couldn't pour from an empty cup, that she had to take care of herself in order to take care of others. She described the therapy sessions that had helped her understand that vulnerability was actually a superpower, that authenticity was more valuable than perfection, and that her struggles could become a source of strength for others facing similar challenges. The conversation flowed naturally from her personal experience to the broader issues of mental health awareness, particularly among young people and new mothers. Catherine spoke passionately about the need to normalize conversations about mental health, to remove the stigma that prevented people from seeking help, and to create support systems that made it easier for people to prioritize their well-being. When Emma asked about her children and how they had handled her absence from public life, Catherine's voice softened with obvious love and pride. She explained how honest she had been with them about needing time to feel better, how they had rallied around her with the kind of unconditional love that only children can provide, and how the experience had actually brought their family closer together. She talked about George's newfound protectiveness, Charlotte's emotional intelligence in recognizing when someone needed extra support, and Louis's ability to bring joy and lightness to even the heaviest moments. The children had taught her, she said, that love wasn't conditional on perfection, it was about showing up authentically, even when you were struggling. The most emotional moment of the interview came when Emma asked about Catherine's message to other women who might be facing similar challenges. Catherine paused, gathering her thoughts, and, when she spoke, her words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. She talked about the mothers scrolling through social media at 3 a.m, feeling inadequate as they compared their messy reality to everyone else's highlight reel. She spoke to the women climbing the corporate ladder while wondering if they were failing their families. She addressed the wives and mothers who had lost themselves in the service of others and forgotten that they mattered too. Her message was simple but profound: you are enough, exactly as you are. Struggling doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Asking for help isn't admitting failure, it's showing wisdom. Taking time to heal isn't selfish, it's necessary. And your vulnerability, your real story, your authentic self is exactly what the world needs. As the interview concluded, Catherine felt drained but also somehow lighter. She had shared parts of herself that she had never spoken about publicly, and, instead of feeling exposed or diminished, she felt empowered. This was what authentic leadership looked like, not pretending to have all the answers, but being willing to share the questions and the journey toward finding solutions. The response to the interview was immediate and intense. Social media platforms were flooded with responses from people sharing their own stories, thanking Catherine for her honesty, and expressing how her words had given them permission to prioritize their own mental health. Mental health organizations reported record numbers of people seeking support, and several other public figures began speaking more openly about their own struggles. But, for Catherine, the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. A handwritten letter arrived at Kensington Palace from a teenage girl named Sophie, who wrote about her struggle with anxiety and depression. She thanked Catherine for showing her that it was possible to be both strong and vulnerable, that getting help was a sign of courage rather than weakness. Sophie's letter joined hundreds of others that arrived in the days following the interview. Teachers wrote about using Catherine's story to start conversations about mental health with their students. Mothers shared how her words had given them permission to seek therapy or take time for self-care. Healthcare workers expressed gratitude for the way she had normalized mental health struggles and encouraged people to seek professional support. As Catherine read through these responses in her office, surrounded by the afternoon light streaming through the windows, she felt a deep sense of purpose that was different from anything she had experienced before. This wasn't about duty or obligation anymore, this was about using her platform to create real change, to touch real lives, to make a real difference in the world. The week following the interview brought a series of private meetings as Catherine began to plan her return to public engagements. She met with the heads of mental health charities, discussing how they could work together to continue the conversation she had started. She spoke with educators about incorporating mental health awareness into school curriculums. She consulted with healthcare professionals about ways to make mental health services more accessible and less stigmatized. Each conversation reinforced her sense that this was the work she was meant to be doing. Not just cutting ribbons or attending galas, but using her voice and platform to address issues that truly mattered. The woman who would be returning to public duties was fundamentally different from the one who had stepped away. She was more purposeful, more authentic, and more connected to her true calling. As she prepared for her first public engagement in months, Catherine felt ready in a way she never had before. She wasn't returning as the perfect princess who never struggled, she was returning as a real woman who had faced real challenges and found real healing. And that authentic version of herself, she was beginning to understand, was exactly what the world needed to see. The morning of Catherine's first public engagement dawned with the kind of clarity that seemed to mirror her own transformed state of mind. Standing before the mirror in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, she adjusted the soft blue dress that had become symbolic of her new approach to royal duties, elegant yet approachable, professional yet personal. Today marked not just her return to public life, but the beginning of a new chapter in how she would serve as Princess of Wales. The venue for her comeback was deeply symbolic, a mental health centre for young people in South London, the same organisation where she had volunteered quietly during her university years, long before she became a household name. The choice was deliberate. Catherine wanted her return to reflect both her authentic passions and her commitment to the causes that had shaped her journey toward healing. As her car pulled up to the modest building, Catherine could see the small crowd of supporters who had gathered despite the early hour. Their faces held a mixture of excitement and something deeper, recognition, perhaps, of someone who had walked through darkness and emerged stronger. These weren't just royal watchers hoping for a glimpse of glamour, they were people who had connected with her story of struggle and recovery. The center's director, Dr. Amelia Chang, greeted Catherine at the entrance with the kind of warm embrace reserved for old friends. They had maintained contact throughout Catherine's time away, with Dr. Chang providing professional insight as Catherine navigated her own mental health journey. The reunion was emotional for both women, representing not just Catherine's return to public service but her evolution into an even more effective advocate for mental wellness. Inside the center, Catherine was surrounded by the energy and hope of young people who were working toward their own healing. Unlike her formal royal visits of the past, this engagement was designed to be conversational and organic. She sat in circles with teenagers discussing their experiences, participated in art therapy sessions, and joined group discussions about the challenges of growing up in an increasingly complex world. What struck observers immediately was how different Catherine seemed. Gone was the careful distance that had characterized many of her previous engagements, replaced by an authenticity and depth of connection that was impossible to fake. When a 17-year-old named Marcus shared his story of overcoming depression, Catherine didn't offer platitudes or formal sympathy. Instead, she spoke honestly about her own dark moments and the tools that had helped her find her way back to the light. The conversation that would later be described as the defining moment of her return happened almost by accident. During a break between scheduled activities, Catherine found herself sitting with a group of young mothers who were participating in the center's family support program. One woman, Sarah, a 23-year-old with two small children, hesitantly asked if Catherine had ever felt like she was failing as a mother. The question hung in the air for a moment, the kind of raw honesty that protocol would typically deflect with a diplomatic non-answer. But Catherine looked directly at Sarah and spoke from her heart. She talked about the nights she had questioned every parenting decision, the guilt that came with balancing public duties and family time, the fear that her children would somehow be damaged by the unique pressures of their circumstances. Her vulnerability opened floodgates. Other mothers began sharing their own fears and struggles, creating a circle of support that transcended the usual boundaries between royal figure and ordinary citizen. Catherine listened with the kind of presence that can only come from someone who has truly walked the path of struggle and healing. She offered insights not as a princess dispensing wisdom from on high, but as a fellow traveler on the complicated journey of motherhood. The impact was immediate and profound. Cell phone videos of Catherine's authentic interactions began circulating on social media, but instead of the usual commentary about her appearance or protocol, the conversation centered on the power of vulnerability and the importance of mental health advocacy. The hashtag #RealRoyalty began trending, with people sharing their own stories of struggle and recovery inspired by Catherine's courage to be human in public. Later that afternoon, Catherine's schedule included a visit to a primary school where she would be launching a new mental health awareness curriculum for young children. As her car traveled through London, she reflected on how different this felt from her previous royal tours. Instead of moving through her day like a beautiful but distant figure in a carefully choreographed performance, she was engaging in meaningful work that aligned with her deepest values and most authentic self. The primary school visit revealed another dimension of Catherine's transformation. Working with children had always been one of her strengths, but now her interactions carried new depth and purpose. She didn't just read to the children or admire their artwork, she engaged with them about feelings, emotions, and the importance of talking to trusted adults when they felt worried or sad. During a session with Year 2 students, 6-year-old Emma asked Catherine if princesses ever felt scared. Instead of deflecting with fairy tale reassurances, Catherine knelt down to the little girl's level and gently explained that everyone feels scared sometimes, even princesses, and that the brave thing to do is to talk about those feelings with people who care about us. The teachers and parents observing these interactions noted something remarkable. Catherine's presence seemed to give the children permission to be honest about their own emotions. Hands shot up around the circle as children shared their own fears and worries, creating an impromptu therapy session that demonstrated the power of adult authenticity in helping children develop emotional intelligence. As the school day ended, Catherine found herself in conversation with the head teacher, Mrs. Roberts, about the broader challenges facing children's mental health. They discussed the pressures of social media, the impact of academic stress, and the importance of creating environments where emotional vulnerability was seen as strength rather than weakness. Catherine's insights came not just from her royal briefings but from her own experience as both a mother and someone who had navigated mental health challenges. The day concluded with a private dinner at Kensington Palace, where Catherine and William hosted representatives from various mental health organizations. The conversation around their dining table was far removed from typical royal entertaining. Instead of formal toasts and ceremonial speeches, the evening became a working session where passionate advocates shared ideas, challenged assumptions, and brainstormed ways to create systemic change in how society approaches mental wellness. Catherine's contribution to these discussions revealed the depth of her transformation. She wasn't just a royal patron lending her name to worthy causes, she had become a genuine expert whose insights came from both professional learning and personal experience. Her questions were sharp, her suggestions practical, and her commitment evident in every word. As the guests departed, many commented that they had never experienced a royal engagement quite like this one. The usual formal distance had been replaced by genuine collaboration, and Catherine's willingness to share her own struggles had created a space where others felt safe to be equally vulnerable and honest. In the quiet of their private sitting room later that evening, Catherine and William reflected on the day's significance. The official return to royal duties had been successful beyond their expectations, but, more importantly, it had confirmed that Catherine's journey through struggle to healing had not just restored her ability to serve, it had enhanced it exponentially. William expressed his pride in his wife's courage, not just in sharing her story but in using her experience to create real change. He had watched her transform from someone who felt defined by others' expectations into a woman who confidently defined her own purpose and approach to service. The marriage that had weathered the storm of her breakdown was emerging stronger and more authentic than ever. As they prepared for bed, Catherine looked at the messages that had poured in throughout the day. Texts from family members expressing their love and support, emails from mental health advocates celebrating the conversations she had started, and social media posts from people sharing how her openness had inspired them to seek help or support others in their own struggles. But, perhaps most meaningful was a voice message from Charlotte, recorded earlier that evening. "Mama, my friend Emily at school said she saw you on the news today and you looked really happy. I'm proud of you for helping people feel better about their worries. I love you lots and lots." The innocence and wisdom in her daughter's words captured something profound about Catherine's journey. She had returned to public life not as someone who had overcome all struggles but as someone who had learned to transform those struggles into sources of strength and service. Her children were watching her model resilience, authenticity, and the courage to be vulnerable, lessons that would serve them well in their own lives. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to Catherine's royal duties. Her schedule was more deliberately planned, with adequate time between engagements for reflection and self-care. Each public appearance was chosen for its alignment with her values and its potential for creating meaningful impact rather than just generating positive publicity. The feedback from the public, the media, and her charitable partners was overwhelmingly positive, but Catherine found that external validation mattered less to her now than the internal knowledge that she was serving from a place of authentic purpose. She had learned to measure success not by column inches or social media metrics but by the real connections made and the lives touched by her work. The woman who had once felt crushed by the weight of expectation now wore her royal responsibilities with a lightness that came from knowing exactly why she was doing the work and how it connected to her deepest values. She had discovered that true strength didn't come from never falling down but from learning how to get back up with more wisdom, compassion, and authenticity than before. As autumn deepened into winter, Catherine's transformation continued to ripple outward. Her approach to royal service was inspiring other public figures to be more open about their own struggles and more purposeful in their platform usage. Mental health organizations reported sustained increases in people seeking support, and the conversations she had started were continuing in schools, workplaces, and communities around the world. But perhaps the most profound change was in Catherine herself. The woman who had once felt she had to be perfect to be worthy now understood that her imperfections, her struggles, and her journey toward healing were exactly what made her worthy of the platform she had been given. She had found her authentic voice, and she was using it to help others find theirs. The return to royal duties was complete, but the transformation it represented was ongoing. Catherine had learned that healing wasn't a destination but a daily practice, that strength wasn't about never struggling but about facing struggles with grace and honesty. She had shown the world that even a princess could break down and build herself back up, and, in doing so, she had given millions of people permission to do the same. Her powerful return to public service marked not just the end of one chapter but the beginning of something entirely new, a form of royal duty that was more human, more honest, and more helpful than anything that had come before. Princess Catherine had found her way home to herself, and, from that authentic foundation, she was ready to serve the world in ways she had never imagined possible.